Howdy, alls. Welcome back to Anthropology 111. It's me, Dr. Edwards, back this time to help you out with Module 5, Exploring Our Human Relationships. Now, this is a really important topic because our relationships really lend insight into how we see and understand the world. They can literally describe our individual histories. I mean, just think about how you were born from your parents and they came from another set of parents and so on and so forth. You create a whole lineage, right? Your individual lineage history. That might lend some insight into your role within society, or at least within your family. And that usually has some indication about what role you're going to play within society. And keep in mind, some of those are ascribed, all right, that they're written for you, that you don't get to change them, such as, well, I mean, in some ways you can, because you can always change your name. But say, my family name is Edwards, okay? And so I come from a long line of Edwardses, and I get to carry that baggage with me for the rest of my life. However, you also have achieved status within society, which is really getting at the things that you accomplish. Now, there's a lot more to this. Let me be clear. I'm simplifying things a bit, but it's important to understand that understanding our relationship to others often gives us key insights to our both achieved and ascribed status. For example, in India, it's a caste system, all right? And if you are born into a particular caste, you are fixed in that. That is ascribed, all right? There's no really moving that. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, you were fixed within that stratum. Similar things here in the West. You can look at our socioeconomic class system, and oftentimes, if you were born into a particular socioeconomic class, that tends to be an ascribed position. It can be very difficult to move upwards from that. It can be really easy to fall below it, right, and fall into a lower socioeconomic class. Lose your job. It's really easy. Doesn't take a lot of, you don't have to work at that. But I'm sure that was a bad joke. Sorry. So understanding how we see ourselves in relation to other people really gets at how we see the world around us. All right. Relationships are often an idiom for life, for our life ways. So we got three main topics that we want to explore this week. We got marriage, we got kinship, and we have sex and gender. I'm going to try to take a little bit of time on each one of these to share some additional insights, point out some examples, try to give you guys all the more to help you out. So let's start with marriage. All groups have some form of it. They may define it differently, let's be really clear, nowhere from an anthropological perspective does it say it has to be between a man and a woman, right? You may have religious beliefs that say that it has to be a particular way for you, and that's perfectly fine. From an anthropological perspective, and cross-culturally, that is not the case, all right? And that's a key thing you need to understand and be able to share within this course, all right? So I'll get to gender here in a little bit. For right now, three basic forms or types of marriage that we tend to see. And these are general categories, all right? I'll break them down a little bit more after I give you an intro to each one. We have monogamy. Lots of people tend to think that this is an everlasting relationship between two individuals. Well, it might be. It also might not be. Monogamy, from an anthropological perspective, is strictly a relationship between two individuals. Okay, it may last a year. It may last 100 years, right? If you live that long. We often tend to see within societies that practice monogamy something called serial monogamy, which is you have a relationship with an individual for 5-10 years or something like that, and then that relationship may dissolve, and you then develop a relationship with somebody else. That pattern we refer to as serial. It is a repeating pattern, so we call it serial monogamy. Now, polygamy. Lots of people think that polygamy is saying that there's multiple wives. Nope, Polygamy is actually just a descriptor to describe having multiple spouses. The term polygamy itself doesn't say multiple wives or multiple husbands. We actually have two unique terms that often get all mixed up with polygamy that describe specific differences, and I'm going to go over those real briefly. We have polygyny, all right, different than polygamy. Polygamy. See, even I get tripped up. You have polygyny, which is a relationship that expresses a husband with multiple wives. Think Sister Wives on the Learning Channel or Big Love on HBO. Right, that's a good form of polygyny. Right. You also have polyandry. We don't tend to see this very often. Really, only a few traditional groups in the world that still practice it tend to be Central Asia, Nepal, Bhutan, northern India, a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, polyandry is when you have multiple husbands, at least two, and a wife. And more often than not, we see a particular type called fraternal polyandry, which means it's two brothers sharing a wife. Now, in any one of these, you kind of peel back the layers and you'll see that there tends to be a relationship or a strong influence with the subsistence system at hand, right? Large agricultural societies in sub-Saharan Africa, many of them tend to be polygynous, right? Have multiple wives. Well, what's the reason for this? We tend to see that having more children equates to having more labor to work the land, which produces more food, okay? So the relationships there are directly tied to their subsistence system. In polyandry, kind of the inverse. Because of rights of inheritance, if you keep dividing a chunk of land again and again and again and again and again, you'll end up with such a small piece of land that nobody can live off of it. So one way to avoid that, if you have a very limited resource base, is to have brothers stay together and marry a wife in common. Okay, that ensures that there's enough of a resource base for all three to live. Okay, yeah, these relationships between marriage systems and subsistence practices, there's usually really clear linkages between them. All right, and I encourage you to be able to kind of pick and tease those out and share them and when we talk about these things in our discussions and in assignments. Now, the third type of marriage system that we tend to see is arranged. Now, that isn't, let's put it this way. You can have a polygynous arranged marriage. You could have a polyandrous arranged marriage. So arranged doesn't mean that it's going to be, a particular type, if you would. It's more that it's a process that's involved, I guess would be a better way to say it. I actually link a film and an article, actually about all of these. I give you lots of extra resources. So be sure to check those out in the written portion of this announcement. Lots of good extra details that you guys can sink your teeth into. Moving on. Oh, no, not moving on yet. Sorry. One last thing that I wanted to share with marriage. Within any marriage system, we tend to see two key rule sets or sets of rules. And we refer to these as endogamous rules and exogamous rules. I need to stress that both are happening at the same time. Let me give you a good example. Within any marriage, you might marry within, you have some things that are shared between you and your spouse, such as, say, religious beliefs. That's a pretty common endogamous rule, right? That the person that you marry shares the same basic belief system that you do. Pretty common. Now, at the same time, that person that you're marrying may be in a different social class, okay? So that's an exogamous rule. That's something that you're marrying out. You're marrying out of your social class into another social class. Okay? So both endogamous and exogamous rules are happening simultaneously. You need to think of them as two sides of a single coin. All right? So yeah, I hope that gives you some extra insights. And a great game to play is to sit there, if you have a significant other, plot out your exogamous and endogamous rules. Or if you're not married or just want to be, silly and have some fun, consider your ideal mate, right? What things would you share in common and what things wouldn't you? And you could, create a list, and one side's going to be labeled endogamous rules and the other's going to be labeled exogamous rules. Yeah, it's kind of fun to see where your values lie. So that's those are the key things that I wanted to share about marriage. Moving on, our next big topic that I wanted to talk about is kinship. Now, people talk about family, but family is so relative. It's really hard to nail out. I mean, because you have family that you're related to by blood. You have family that you're not related by blood. You're just related by marriage, right? This creates a whole wide spectrum of different types of family. And we also may have relationships that aren't recognized by marriage or by blood, but they're so significant to us that we often refer to these people as family. I have really close personal friends that are family to me, all right? But they don't fall into any of these other prescribed categories. One way that we get around those issues is we use the term kinship, all right? Kinship really allows us to explore the relative nature of relationships, right? Some of them may be blood-based, some of them may be marriage-based, some of them may be based on economic relationships. Trade partners can have kinship relations. Oftentimes, they tend to. And you might have some distant uncle that you do business with. There are actually lots of good examples of that in anthropology. Excuse me. Some good examples that I highlight in this week's written portion of the announcement is the Nuer. Now, I shared them last week with Economic Systems. They're a group in southern Sudan that are pastoralists. They rely on cattle as their subsistence base. We talked before. I highlighted their economic aspects. This time I'm highlighting their kinship aspects, right? They have such a unique system that, first of all their cattle have names, and cattle are given and received at very specific times and, times and places in their lives. So say like at a wedding, right? When that happens, you're going to remember that. And all those cattle, because they have names, you can literally trace the significance and value of social relationships in the giving and receiving of cattle among the Nuer. To put it mildly, cattle is the idiom of life among the Nuer. Everything is defined through them, even social relationships, right? So they're a great example. Another one that I highlight, and this one's a little different. This one really gets at this kind of idea that there's some universal maternal love, that mother's instincts are natural and are universal. Well, Nancy Shepherd Hughes wrote a book called Death Without Weeping. I give you an article of it, not the entire book. But this really highlights, how relationships, family, kinship, is entirely relative. Trigger warning, this article, as you can suggest from the title, kind of harsh, all right, from our Western perspective. Let's be clear that that's our bias. Because this article is very in your face about the realities that certain mothers face in Brazil. Specifically, they select which of their offspring to invest in and which not to. So as you might imagine, those that get invested in survive, grow up. Those that are not invested in do not. All right. So yeah, heads up. Some rough reading, especially from our Western cultural bias. We tend to perceive maternal relations with their offspring as very unique and untouchable, right? But it's important from a cultural perspective to recognize that that's our baggage, okay? I'm not saying that's bad or wrong, but to understand that there are other ways, other understandings of those relationships. And that really underscores this whole concept of kinship and family, all right? So yeah, some good stuff to dig into. Looking at my list of notes here. Last topic that I wanted to touch base on. Sex and gender. Now, wow, you could spend an eternity picking and dissecting and critically analyzing sex, gender, sexuality, sexual orientation. Oftentimes, particularly in our Western society, many of these get conflated. And that's a fancy way of saying, smushed together. I need to stress that sex is not gender, is not sexuality. The three are independent of one another. Now, we often, in our Western society, tend to have difficulty with this idea because, for us, there's a very long tradition of sex directly dictating gender, which then comes with prescribed societal standards on sexuality. Now there's a lot of issues with that. First of all, if we look cross-culturally, we see that gender is not limited to being male or female, right? Is not directly linked to a binary of biology, of being biologically sexed, male or female, right? That's tend to be where in the West, where you're biologically male, therefore your gender is male. You see how it flows from one right to the other? Well, we actually get to blame a lot of Victorian roots in history for our particular conceptions or our traditional conceptions of gender. So yeah, I really want you all to critically question that. We are not limited to a binary. There is much more than male or female, female, male. In fact, there are so many variants of it. It's impossible to say that we only have these two. Okay. In fact, I want to encourage you all to think of gender as being fluid. It is often relative to unique times in people's lives and social requirements. There's all sorts of examples. I wish I had the time and space to share all of them. There are examples of, let's see here. We got the hijras. Hijras are a great example, found in India and southern Pakistan. And these tend to be biological males that are unicized, and they play a very unique role within society. Now, what I need to stress is, because we might perceive them as Westerners, as Western scientists, we might perceive them as they were born biological males, therefore they have to be male. Within their cultural construction, right, they are something completely other. They are a third gender. They are neither male nor female. They are a third. They are hijra, right? So I really need to drive that point home. There are other examples like the Berdache, two spirits among many Native American groups. You can actually read Lewis and Clark's journals and how they encountered such individuals. Now, they tended to be biological males that played the role of females. However, there are also counterexamples, biological females playing the roles of males. So it goes both ways. And again, they're not considered rooted in their biology. They are understood in their social relationship within the community, and it is often this third thing. It is neither maleness nor femaleness. Okay, so again, that's our Western bias that tends to support it has to be male or female. So I really want to encourage you to move away from that. Think about a fluid spectrum. And you can fall anywhere on it. Our culture and society tends to provide room for such things. I'm at a loss because I feel like this is a topic that I could talk to you hours and hours and hours about. But I know that you all have limited time. I have limited time, so. I think I've stressed getting away from the binary enough to understand gender as being something not necessarily rooted in biology. On top of all that, sexuality, right? Sexual orientation. Yet a third thing that is not necessarily linked to the other two. It's kind of silly, but this might drive my point home. I may be biologically male, gender is neutral, and be sexually attracted to penguins. Okay? You might laugh at that. That's perfectly fine. All right, I'm saying it kind of jokingly, but not to devalue anybody's sex, gender, or sexual orientation. My point is to help you understand that all three of those components are independent of one another. All right, and I choose a ridiculous example, penguins in particular, to help drive that point home. I hope that you see that. Yeah. Looking at my notes. Yeah, touch that. I think that's where I'm going to leave you for this week. Of course, if you have any questions, any concerns, want to, talk about these concepts further, because I like talking about them, you don't hesitate to give me a call, shoot me an email. We can set up a Skype meeting. I am here to answer all your anthropological questions. So that said, have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you again next week. Take care. Bye.